Hello and welcome back. I am Mr. Sosotris, and this week I'm continuing my series going through my TBR as a means of holding myself accountable for reading stuff I already have instead of getting more books, which I'm mostly sticking to, which is good. And so last week I did my sci-fi TBR, and so this week I'm gonna do my fantasy TBR, and then after that I'm gonna do my literary fiction classics TBR, and I think that'll kind of cover all of the big stuff. There's lots of other smaller genres that I still read, like mysteries and stuff, but I think those are the big three that make up the bulk of the stuff that I enjoy reading. So today it's fantasy, and we're going to go through the books that I want to read and my thoughts about them. So let's do this. Now, this is the one book that I've purchased this year that I haven't read yet. So I bought 3 books. 2 were nonfiction and I have read them, and this is one that I haven't read yet, but it was a pre-order because I love this author, so whatever, it's okay. And that is 10 Incarnations of Rebellion by Vaishnavi Patel. Her first 2 books were sort of myth retellings, taking characters from Hindu mythology and telling their stories. And they were fantastic. I love her writing so much. This one is sort of not urban fantasy, but like historical fantasy. It looks at sort of a blending of mythology and history, looking at, I believe this is the rebellion against the British in 1945. I believe. Don't quote me on that. I have not read this yet. Oh, no, this was the 60s. Oh, okay. It's an alternate history. Okay, here we go. It's an alternate history of India that was never liberated from the British in the 40s. And so it's set in the 60s, and it has someone who is sort of able to, not be possessed by, but to call upon different godlike avatars in order to help her fight, the British in this alternate history retelling. Anyways, it looks fantastic. I adore this author, and this is one of those kind of auto-buy authors for me. So as soon as this book came out, I was like, absolutely, I'm on a book buying ban, but this is important because I also wanted it in hardcover because I love this author so much. So can't wait to read this one. Now, the next one, I don't know if this really counts as fantasy, but it is a myth retelling also, and that is The Children of Jocasta by Natalie Haynes. I've loved her other 2 books, and this one is focusing on Jocasta, who is the mother of Oedipus and all of that fun stuff, and so this is sort of a retelling of her story. And Oedipus isn't an especially fantastical myth. I think there's like the Sphinx, but in terms of like the gods and magic and stuff, there isn't a lot of that, but I still consider it sort of fantasy because it exists in that realm of like myth retellings, which are sort of a subset of fantasy. So, but I love Natalie Haynes, and this is a complex character who is just kind of there to be tragic, and so it'll be nice to see kind of her perspective, and I really, really trust Haynes' writing. So excited to get into this one. Next up is The Mere Wife by Miranda Vana Haley. This one is a Beowulf retelling. It's sort of looking at Grendel's mother and all that. Now, this one I do want to read. So during my Lit 101 series, eventually I will get to Beowulf. And so what I want to do for that one is we're going to read the poem Beowulf, and then I want to read this right after and do like a comparison and look at how this draws on the poem. And so I'm going to be reading this one officially as part of kind of the Lit 101 series, as part of the Beowulf section. So I'm excited to get to this. This gal also is the one who wrote the kind of bro translation of Beowulf, which is right here. Let me get this. This one. She wrote this translation of Beowulf, which sort of takes like modern vernacular and mixes it in with kind of the brutal world of the Danes. And so I want to kind of read these 2 together as kind of a pair. So I'm excited to get to that. Next up is Children of Anguish and Anarchy by Tomi Adeyemi. This is the 3rd book in the Orisha series. And now, it's kind of sad. This one got some negative reviews, and I don't see a lot of people talking about it. A lot of people said they were disappointed, but then I also saw people say that they were disappointed by the second book, and I liked the second book in the series. So I want to kind of ignore people's thoughts about this and just reread the series, because I've read the first two books as they came out, but it's been a while since this one was released. So I want to go back and reread kind of all three in order. This is a really fantastic fantasy series. It draws on West African mythology. Anyways, I do want to read this one, and this is such a gorgeous edition. It's got like sprayed edges, and it's so fancy. And I really, really enjoyed the first one, and the character arcs are good. They're very flawed characters, and I think that's why people maybe didn't like them, is they make sort of bad decisions, but those bad decisions have consequences, and they learn from the consequences, and they grow. So I don't know. I am excited to reread the series and finally finish it, but this has been on my shelf looking at me and reminding me that I need to read it, so I want to get to that eventually. Next up is Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. I've really enjoyed everything else that I've read by this author. This one is sort of dark fairy tale fantasy, and the prose is really beautiful, and the voice, this author has a really strong narrative voice. I will say, for people who are looking to move on from a certain disgraced fantasy author whose name rhymes with Beale Bayman, this is an author that I think a lot of people will find fits into that kind of like dark, twisted, mythological fantasy sort of world. Alex Harrow is fantastic, really gorgeous writing, and I would highly suggest her work. Her first book of hers that I read was The Once and Future Witches, which I really, really loved, and I'm looking forward to getting into this one. I heard this one is a lot darker and kind of twistier, so I'm excited to read it. Next up is The Will of the Many by James Islington, and Islington? I think it's Islington, maybe. Anyways, the second book I think has just come out or is about to come out, and so I need to get to this one and actually read it. I've heard this is sort of fantasy inspired by like the Roman Empire and anything that's sort of anti-empire, tearing down oppressive systems. I'm all about that. And I heard the magic system in this one is really good. Now, this one, again, has gotten some mixed reviews, but for the most part, people seem to really like this one. And I've never read anything by this author before, so I'm excited to get into it. I've talked about this before, but next is the Inheritance trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. I've loved everything by N.K. Jemisin that I've read before, and this is a book. This is like an omnibus collection of 3 books together, so that's why it's so huge. But I have read War and Peace this year, and I think War and Peace might actually be, well, it might be about the same length. It's just the text is a lot bigger in this one, so it looks bigger than it is. So this is definitely doable, and I'm excited to get to read this one. I've heard this one has got kind of gods and magic, and I don't know, the world building sounds really, really cool, and N.K. Jemisin has never let me down ever, so I'm excited to read this one. Next up is Warrior of the Altai by Robert Jordan. Yes, that Robert Jordan. This is a standalone book, I believe, that he wrote separate from The Wheel of Time, and it's one of those ones where it was just on the shelf, and I was like, Robert Jordan, what? And it kind of jumped out at me. I know he's also done some Conan stories, but I haven't been able to find those. But I really like Robert Jordan. Say what you will about him. He can be a little wordy and a little dense, but he's got that sort of just classic fantasy scope. And I think that's what makes his work so compelling, is it's just a world you can live in. And so I'm curious to see how he handles sort of a shorter standalone fantasy story. So I'm excited to read this one eventually. Next up is Stephen King's Fairy Tale. This is one that I haven't read yet, but I really like Stephen King, and I've been reading more of his stuff lately. I'm currently going through the Dark Tower series by him, which I've read before, but I haven't read the new book that came out, The Wind Through the Keyhole. So this time I'm going to be reading the series with that book. So I guess that one's technically on my TBR as well. But this is another one of King's works that I really want to get into. I've heard nothing but good things about this, and a lot of people have given it really fantastic reviews, so I'm excited to dive into this. This is also a very chunky book, so it will, you know, it's one of those books you can really just like live with for a while, which I appreciate. Next up is the Poppy War trilogy by R.F. Kuang. This one is dark fantasy, kind of grimdark fantasy, really violent, and I've heard nothing but good things about it. I know R.F. Kuang is sort of not controversial, but sort of mixed reviews. Folks either really love her stuff or it just doesn't click with them. And everything else that I've read of hers, I've really liked. I really liked Babel. I really liked Yellowface. And so I'm really excited to see how she handles sort of a longer trilogy of books instead of standalones. So this is definitely one that I want to get to. And I have all three of them. I've collected them over the years and they're just on my shelf. For some reason, I feel like I'm really intimidated by them. I don't know why. The first book isn't really that long, so I just need to dive into it and read it. Next up is Gormenghast by Mervyn Peake. Now, the first book in the Gormenghast series, Titus Groan, was phenomenal. I love Mervyn Peake's writing style. It's so fun. This is another one of the sort of, if you enjoy Shmuel Shmeiman, then this is another author that you would probably like, because he's got that sort of dense, complex Dickensian language full of irony and beautiful imagery that's sort of startling and jumps out at you. And the whole thing has a kind of dreamlike, almost fairy tale quality, but sort of like a stagnant, decaying fairy tale. And I'm really, really excited to read this one. The first book was phenomenal. I really loved the language. The characters are all so weird and complex. And it's a really interesting fantasy setting because there's no magic really, but it's just this vast, sprawling, endless castle. And there's people who live outside of it in sort of villages and stuff. But it's just this strange world where everyone is sort of stuck in their old routines and their old ways, and then you have two characters who sort of enter into this world and they sort of start to mess it up. You've got the arrival of the baby Titus, who grows up and he's sort of older in this book, and then you've got Steerpike, who's sort of the kitchen boy who is able to manipulate people into giving himself more and more power, and he gets more and more influence over this family, and the effects that has on kind of this stagnant, strange, ruling family who is sort of doomed to decay. And it's just, I don't know, the vibes of this are just wonderful. The language is incredible, and I cannot wait to continue the series. Next up, we've got Discworld by Terry Pratchett. This has sort of been a blank spot on my fantasy world a lot. I really, really feel like when I was a kid that I had gotten into Discworld instead of Xanth, because Xanth has now kind of been universally sort of pushed aside by history, because the books were filled with all kinds of stuff that it just wasn't great. There was just a lot of stuff in there that you read it as an adult and you're like, why did I like this as a kid? Like, it's just not great. And the author just has a lot of fixations on stuff that just, it doesn't seem very fun to read anymore. And I really wish that at that age I'd latched onto Discworld, but for some reason I just never got around to it. I don't know. I always felt like maybe Discworld was aimed at a younger audience and it wasn't something that I would enjoy. I don't know what I was thinking. As a kid, I was very terrified of trying new things. And so I was very much like, it has to be this, and I don't want to get out of this bubble. Like, I think I tried The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but it was outside my comfort zone for some reason, and so I never really got into Narnia. So Narnia is another one that I do want to eventually read all of them, but it's not one of those books that I glommed onto as a kid that I really, really connected to. The only thing that I read when I was younger that I really, really genuinely latched onto and liked, unfortunately, was the Harry Potter books when I was about like 12, 13 or so. And so those were really important to me when I was younger, but because of the author, I just can't really support them now. So, I mean, you're free to read them if you want, but I don't really want to promote them in any way on this channel. So Discworld has always kind of consistently been lauded as a classic, and for, as far as we know, Terry Pratchett's reputation is intact. He was a good person. He treated people well. And so this is one of those series that's like, I really need to get into it. And I know people say don't start with the first book, but I just can't not do it that way. I have to read everything in order. I can't just jump into the series in the middle and kind of move around. That just doesn't fit with how my brain works. So when I do get into this, I will be starting at the beginning with the knowledge that the series does find its footing later on. So, Discworld, I will read it eventually. Next up is the Book of Dust series by Philip Pullman. Now, I've been putting this one off because I wasn't sure if this trilogy would be finished. I do have them, and we recently learned that Philip Pullman is writing the third book, and it will be releasing, and so the trilogy will be completed. So now it's time. I can actually start reading this. The His Dark Materials trilogy is another huge favorite. I read that one fairly early on, and I absolutely loved it. It was so good, and it just fit with how my brain worked. And so, but again, I got into that one a little bit later. I think I was like 15 or 16 when I read that series. But still, I'm kind of glad that I read it at that point, because I was able to appreciate a lot of the nuance that I would have missed if I'd gotten into it earlier. But this is sort of a prequel series that digs into the world a lot more and kind of expands on His Dark Materials universe. So I'm excited to read this one. The first book is La Belle Sauvage. And I just have to say this. This is really silly, but where am I? Here it is. Okay. Can I say whoever designed the covers, just, I wish that they had communicated with one another. So this is the first book. The title of the series is The Book of Dust. The title of the book is La Belle Sauvage, which is down at the bottom. The second one, the title of the book is here, and then The Book of Dust is down here. And when you look at the spines, it's even worse, because you've got the title of the series, title of the book, title of the book, title of the series. And it just doesn't fit. And it makes me mad. But it's okay. Philip Pullman, I still love you. Just, why can't the covers match? It's fine. I'm fine. But I do want to read this eventually. All right, moving on. Next, we've got A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. This is the prequel to the Priory of the Orange Tree. And this is one that I've had on my shelf for a bit. I really enjoyed the first book, and I want to continue it. But it's funny, the Priory of the Orange Tree was sort of the book that got me back into reading in like a big way. Before, I would just kind of read sort of occasionally, and that was the book that really like got me back into reading, because it was when I first discovered Book Talk, and it really sort of reignited my love of fantasy, because I'd sort of given up on fantasy as sort of repetitive and not something that I had really enjoyed. And so I do want to eventually get into this one, but I keep putting it off, probably because it's large. But again, it's not that long. The text is fairly large, and the margins are pretty big. So, this is one that it isn't really that intimidating. It just looks intimidating. So maybe I'll check out the audiobook from the library and go through it that way, because that'll be a little bit more portable, or the ebook from the library, one of those. But this is one that I do want to read. All right, next up we've got The Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 4 in the Stormlight Archive, and I have mixed feelings about this one. I do want to read it because I do want to continue the series, but I feel like the series feels a bit aimless at this point. Like, the first book was really phenomenal. Even though it was very slow paced, there really was a sense of like character arc and building towards something. And then the second book, you've got expanding on that. And then the third book, while I enjoyed the vibes overall, it kind of felt like the movement of the plot was slowing down to the point where it was just, and then this thing happened, and then this thing happened. And I know there's a bigger story being told, but I felt like it was getting a little directionless, and I'm a little worried that that's going to continue with this one. And so, and I've heard people when they get into the book after this, the fifth book, that they just were really disappointed. It felt like it wasn't really going anywhere, even though the fifth book is sort of the ending of the big, kind of one of the big first arcs. So I don't know. This is one that I'm not racing to read, but I do want to eventually read it because I do genuinely enjoy the world, but it just isn't sort of as captivating as I thought it would be. All right, next up we've got an indie author who's local to my area, and that is Callum Walker and the Ascension. This is book one of like a 4-book series, I believe. Maybe there's more books coming out by J.M. Shaw. I sort of stumbled onto this randomly. I was walking through a bookstore and the author was doing a signing, and so I was able to get the author to sign it. I was really happy about that. And so this is, I think, urban fantasy. You've got sort of the magical world and the real world coming together, fairy tale elements blending with the real world. It looked really, really cool. I'm really kind of engaged, or like, it really genuinely seemed interesting. And so I have the first 3 books, and I believe the 4th book just came out. So I need to get into this and actually read it, but I will get to that eventually. And then finally on my physical TBR, I've got The Golem and the Jinni by Helen Wecker, or Ellen Wecker. And this one just seems really, really cool. I think this is a series. There is other books in the series, but it's kind of a blending of like Jewish folklore and Muslim folklore. And so you've got 2 sort of beings from the respective mythologies who come together, and you've got elements of both like folk traditions kind of coming together and the contrast between them and everything. And it just looked wonderful. This looked really, really cool, and this has gotten really good reviews. And this edition, I got this from a used bookstore, but it's got like the deckled edges and it just looks very antique, and I love the cover design. So this is one that I'm really excited to get to, and I do know there's more in the series, but again, I'll get to it eventually. We'll see how it goes. All right, so moving on to the non-physical stuff. The audiobook that I have on my TBR is The City of Last Chances by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Now, I read his sci-fi book, Children of Time, and he's a great writer. I really liked that one. And so this is fantasy series, and there's a bunch of books in that series. So I'm curious to see how this author handles fantasy. So I'm excited to get into that one. And now we're getting into ebooks. And so I've got one is The Witch in the Lighthouse by Azalea Forrest. This is an indie fantasy, maybe urban fantasy. I'm not quite sure how it plays out, but you've got sort of, it's more of a character study where you've got this character who has sort of a traumatic past, who sort of isolates herself by working at a lighthouse, and happens across another witch who also has sort of trauma in her past, and the two are able to kind of work together and help each other out. And there's a second book in the series, and it just looked really, really good. So I'm excited to read that one. Next up is sort of a romantasy-esque thing, and that is A Game of Wings and Marks by Rebecca Crunden. Now, I've read this author's sci-fi works, Dust and Lightning, and then there's another one. And really fantastic author. The one that I read before, it wasn't a romance, it was more of like a thriller, but it was like a sci-fi thriller, and just phenomenal writing, great characters. The world building felt real and tangible in cool ways. And so this one has sort of got angels and demons, and then of course a mortal person who gets caught up in this conflict. And I believe it's a standalone. I don't know if there's a sequel yet or if there will be sequels, but it looked really good and I really love the author. So I'm excited to read this one. And I think you can get this one on Kindle Unlimited if you have it. Next up is The Bewitching by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is her latest release. The woman is a machine. I don't know how she puts out so many books. And every book is like a totally different genre. But this one is like dark fantasy, I believe. And I've loved everything of hers that I've read. She's one of my favorite authors, and she's done fantasy in the past, and so I'm excited to get into this one. This one looks sort of darker fantasy, but Silvia Moreno Garcia is legendary, fantastic author. I love her work so much, and so I'm excited to get to this one. Next up in the ebook list is The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This is epic fantasy inspired by Chinese mythology and history, and this is another one. I keep seeing it mentioned, but I've never actually dived into it. And I do have the first book in ebook form. Each book in the series is quite large. The series is called The Dandelion Dynasty, and Ken Liu was the translator for 2 of the Three Body Problem books, which I absolutely loved. And so I'm excited to get into his own sort of fantasy works, not just his translation. But this one has gotten really good reviews, and I've heard that the style is very sort of reminiscent of like traditional Chinese classics, like the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, or Journey to the West, those kinds of books. But I'm really excited to get into this one, and it's fantasy that's based on a folklore tradition that I'm not as familiar with, so I'm excited to get into that. Next is the Realm of Fae series by Ben Alderson. This is romantasy. It's sort of a send-up of the A Court of Thorns and Roses things, except better and gay, so, you know, I'm there. So this one's traumatic and romantic, and I don't know, it's definitely one that I want to get into. And I think I've got the first 3 books, and I think there might be 4 or 5, I'm not sure, but it looks great, and I love Ben Alderson's writing. He's so good at like writing these sort of melodramatic, angsty romances that it works. Like, it doesn't feel overdone. It doesn't feel melodramatic just for the sake of it. It genuinely works with the world building, and they're just a lot of fun to read. Next up is Adwell's Sin by Daniel T. Jackson. This is the sequel to his book Illborn, which was one of my favorite fantasy books when I read it. I wouldn't really call it grimdark, but it's epic fantasy for sure. It's darker. It's sort of based in a world where you've got the equivalent of like the Spanish Inquisition starting up. And so you've got religious persecution ramping up. And then you've got random people who have developed sort of specific powers related to sort of these 3 words that they have kind of in their heads that they can't get out of. And they all share visions of this gate. And so the first book was spectacular. I absolutely loved it. And I have the second one. The third book is called Gatebound, which I believe came out recently. And so I'm definitely continuing with that. If you enjoy, not really Game of Thrones. Well, actually, okay, Game of Thrones, the political aspects of it. But also just the writing style of something like The Name of the Wind, where you've got really fantastic world building, really good characters. This is definitely the one for you. And it's a series that will be completed. I believe there's going to be 5 books ultimately, or 4 books, maybe 4 books. There's 3 out now and there's 1 more after. But really fantastic fantasy, really complex and interesting and brutal and just compelling. So I'm really, really excited to continue with this series. And then finally on this list, we've got We Are the Dead by Mike Shackle. This is grimdark fantasy. I think it's a trilogy. I don't know if there's a 4th book, but I've got all 3 books. I've been kind of collecting them through the years, and I've heard nothing but good things about this one. It's apparently really brutal, and there's something about grimdark that I find comforting, and I don't know why, if that means there's something wrong with me, but it's like you've got a world that's predictably awful, and so everyone is sort of braced to cope with the next awful thing. It's not like you've got a world where everything is fairly okay and then it gets worse. It's like when you've got a world where kind of you expect everything to be terrible, you're always prepared for things to be terrible. And I don't know, I find that a little comforting. I don't know, it's weird. But Mike Shackle has gotten great reviews, and this series I've heard nothing but good things about them. So I'm excited to get into it. Maybe I'll read it sort of over the winter when I need something dark and gloomy. I don't know, but that is one that I'm looking forward to. So that is my Fantasy TBR. There's a lot of books on here, and I am slowly getting through my TBR. I am a slow reader when I'm reading something physically because I don't like to rush through things, and I just find I retain things more when I read slower. So if I'm going through like an audiobook, I have lots of time with which to read it because I have a pretty long commute to work, and I've got lots of time where I'm like walking to and from things. So I have lots of time where I can listen to audiobooks, and so I get through those quite a bit faster. But physical books take me a little bit longer because I don't like rushing through them, and I just tend to read a little bit slower. When I was younger, I would read really, really fast, but I would just skim through books, and then I'd get to the end and I'd be like, I don't remember anything about what I read. And then when I read it again, I would find whole sections that I don't even remember. And so I sort of learned to slow down a bit and take it easier and just enjoy the experience of reading. And that has been good because I retain a lot more of what I read, but it does take me a lot longer to get through books. So that's why this TBR is so long. But I haven't been buying new books willy-nilly, and there are a lot of books coming out that I find interesting and that I want to read, but I will get to those eventually because you do not have to just constantly be purchasing books. Also, this year has been just a very expensive year anyways, but that's okay. With that said, I will let you go. I will see you next week, and in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.